All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendis est. Feminism's Trojan Horse: How Female Power Destroys from Within. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Feminism's Trojan Horse, a field guide for men who still notice reality. The Trojan Horse of Equality: How the gynocentric core extracts the masculine spirit. Debunking the welfare state's sugar daddy scheme with the trivium, the Stoics' refusal to validate female hysteria, and the logical necessity of the androcentric restoration stand in the rubble of the once great citadel of logos, and look upon what you have allowed to pass through the gates. We were promised akalitas, equality before the law, but what was lowered from the belly of that wooden horse was dominatio? Feminism entered the Western psyche not as a partner, but as a parasite, utilizing a world system where the core gynocentric emotional incontinence sucks the marrow from the masculine periphery. You, the builder, the thinker, the logician, have been demoted from architects of civilization to draft animals in a feminist farm. Your labor extracted via the tax state to subsidize the hypergamy of the ungrateful. The patriarchy they wail about is a ghost story told to scare children into obedience, while the reality is a matriarchal welfare Leviathan that has replaced the husband with the bureaucrat and the father with the child support lien. This is the systematic invalidation of your very spirit. They call your competence privilege and your sacrifice oppression, relying on the gamma bias of the mob to drown out the natural law that builds nations. Consider the sheer biological effrontery of the wage gap, a mathematical lie so tedious it would be funny if it weren't legally mandated. The left frames your competence as theft and her gender studies degree as virtuous suffering. Here is a syllogism to shatter the spell. Survival requires the solving of complex problems. The feminine modality prioritizes pathos, feelings over techne, solutions. Therefore, the feminization of culture is a suicide pact. When a tech giant fires a brilliant engineer to hire a diversity consultant, they aren't building the future. They are burning the furniture to keep the feelings warm. This is the negligible utility of the woke mind virus, energy expending inward, consuming the host, until nothing remains but a hollowed out husk of inclusivity devoid of innovation, merit, or truth. Now, apply this Hongguan betrayal to the intimate torture of your daily life. She tells a joke that is painfully unfunny, a deliberate social shit test designed to gauge if you are a man of substance or a sycophant. If you fake laugh, you fail the trivium, you betray the truth to appease the ego, signaling you are a resource to be mined rather than a force to be reckoned with. If you remain silent, holding the frame of the Stoic, you assert the logos. They pretend to need emotional support over trivialities to distract you from the noble pursuit of the transcendentals, the good, the true, the beautiful, keeping you tethered to the swamp of neurosis. It is an evolutionary strategy of resource acquisition. Keep the male distracted, confused, and groveling for approval, and he will never realize he is being farmed. It is time to stop being the plow horse, friend. It is time to reclaim the polis and drive this Trojan horse into the sea. The gynocentric world system, how the core exploits the masculine periphery. The Greeks gave us a word for it, doureos hippos, the Trojan horse. Athena herself crafted the strategy, hide the agents of destruction inside a vessel of beauty, a false gift. Feminism entered the gates of Western civilization bearing the same inscription, equality, a beautiful word, a transcendental promise. Yet once those gates were thrown open, once the naive city dwellers had drunk their wine and retired to their beds, the warriors emerged from the belly of the beast. Their mission? Not to conquer territory, but to dismantle the logos that built the city in the first place. Look around you at the smoldering wreckage of our institutions. The term equality has been transmuted into a weapon of redistribution, a siphoning mechanism designed to extract the creative energy of the masculine and redirect it toward the insatiable maw of the gynocentric core. I watched this happen in slow motion at what was once the Cathedral of Innovation, Bell Labs. In its golden age, this was a temple of the masculine virtue technique, a place where men of merit climbed the apprenticeship mastery ladder through sheer intellectual dominance. The transistor, the laser, the CCD sensor, all birthed in an environment that valued competence above all else. Then came the parasite, diversity initiatives, quota systems, and the shrieking demands of inclusion replaced the ladder of mastery. The result? The once great engine of creation sputtered and stalled, strangled by the very emotional support dynamic that ruined so many marriages. The state, acting as the simulant husband, forced the company to hire based on biological incidental traits rather than the ability to engineer the future. Innovation requires a singular, almost monastic focus, a silence that the feminine imperative, with its constant need for validation and emotional noise, cannot tolerate. The apparatchiks of this decay have a name for their enemy, a boogeyman they invoke to justify their parasitism, the patriarchy. Use your dialectic, as Socrates would demand, and strip this word to its bones. Patriarchy is not a description of reality. It is a gamma bias framing trick, a linguistic phantom conjured to justify the exploitation of the productive class by the political class. A simple syllogism exposes the lie. If the patriarchy were a system designed by men to benefit men at the expense of women, then men would not comprise 95% of workplace deaths. 99% of combat deaths, and would not be the overwhelming majority of the homeless and the suicidal. A system of male privilege would not require men to sacrifice their lives in industrial accidents to keep the lights on. The patriarchy is a myth sold to you by the same people who claim the state is a benevolent caretaker. It is a distraction to keep you from seeing the extraction mechanism operating right in front of your eyes. Let us look at this extraction through the lens of formal logic, which, unlike the emotional incontinence of the left, does not care about your feelings. Consider the syllogism of deceit, premise A. Feminism argues for equality of outcome between men and women. Premise B. Physis, nature dictates a biological variance in interest and aptitude between the sexes. Conclusion. Therefore, feminism is a conspiracy against physis. And what is physis? It is the natural order, the alignment with the transcendentals, the good, the true, the beautiful. By fighting nature, feminism places itself in opposition to truth. It is a lie foundationalized. They demand equal pay for equal work, ignoring the Marxist labor theory of value that underpins this fraud. They compare the negligible utility of a gender studies degree to the world-altering utility of a petrochemical engineering degree and cry injustice when the market assigns different values. Value is not subjective, nor is it a social construct. It is rooted in the reality of what works, what sustains life, and what builds civilization. To force an employer to pay equal wages for unequal utility is to break the economic back of the polis. This breaking of the polis is most visible in the death of due process. The Romans gave us the concept, a necessary shield against the fury of the mob. Yet look at the modern family court or the campus Title IX tribunal. Here, the presumption of innocence, a cornerstone of the mixed constitution, is sacrificed on the altar of believe all women. The legal system has been feminized. It operates on pathos rather than logos. The result is the state simulating the role of the husband, providing welfare and emotional support to women via the taxation of male labor. This is the dependency trap. The state subsidizes female hypergamy and the bad choices of the left, effectively gaslighting men into believing they are the oppressors while they are. In fact, the Atlas figures holding up the entire parasitic structure. Immanuel Wallerstein gave us world systems theory to explain how the economic core nations exploit the periphery. I tell you now that this dynamic is the perfect model for the sexual politics of the West. The core is gynocentrism, the protected consuming class. The periphery is you, the male laborer, the innovator, the soldier. The core does not trade with the periphery, it extracts from it. It uses the coercive power of the state, the manipulation of natural law, and the dismantling of subsidiarity to ensure that your energy flows up while their edicts flow down. To restore the polis, we must reclaim the spaces reserved for virtuous men. The private sphere has been invaded by the public pathology of the feminine imperative. We must evict the Trojan horse, rebuild the gates, and let the logos rule once more. The alternative is the fall, and we have fallen far enough. This sabotage extends beyond the battlefield of words into the realm of character, where we must juxtapose the stoic titans of history against the stunted grovelers of the modern era. To witness the modern male simpering for approval is to observe the total inversion of the Roman virtue of gravitas, where Cato the Younger endured the collapse of the Republic with a stoicism that bordered on the divine. The modern simp crumbles at the slightest rise in a woman's eyebrow, trading his birthright of dignity for a fleeting pat on the head from a gynocentric establishment that despises his very essence. The dialectic of the shit test, deconstructing the bad joke and the problem solver. Consider the linguistic terrorism of the neologism mansplaining, a term weaponized by cultural Marxists to pathologize male competence. By dissecting the etymology, we expose the gamma bias inherent in the leftist worldview. It is a portmanteau designed to shame the articulation of knowledge, framing the biological male imperative to solve problems, the application of logos as a pathological vice. This constitutes a classic psychological projection of the feminine incapacity for systems thinking onto the masculine mind. When a man explains a concept, he engages in the transmission of truth. When a woman or her simpering male ally accuses him of mansplaining, they utilize a framing trick to elevate ignorance over understanding. They seek to shame the architect for describing the design while they themselves cannot lay a single brick. This acts not as a critique of tone, but as a sabotage of competence, a direct assault on the apprenticeship mastery ladder where knowledge is passed from the master to the novice to ensure the survival of civilization. This anti-competence narrative manifests most insidiously in the dialectic of the bad joke, a biological shit test deployed to gauge a man's immunity to manipulation. Picture this: a woman deliberately tells a joke that lacks a punchline or makes a statement of glaring logical fallacy, creating a moment of social friction. The feminized man, terrified of causing discomfort, emits a fake laugh, a submission signal that proves he values her temporary emotional state over the truth. He has failed the test. He has signaled that he will lie to preserve the peace, making him a weak protector. The Stoic, however, recognizes this as a rhetorical trap. By utilizing the trivium, specifically the faculty of logic, he identifies the non sequitur and refuses to validate the stupidity. He remains silent, or he deconstructs the fallacy with surgical precision. This stone wall is not rudeness, it is an assertion of dominance and frame control. It tells the feminine imperative, I do not bend to reality, I impose my will upon it. History offers a stark contrast to this modern degeneracy in the figure of Cato the Younger, a man of such stoic resolve that he walked the streets of Rome barefoot, impervious to the scorching heat, reading not gossip, but the Stoic texts. Cato represented the unmoved mover, the philosopher king who could not be swayed by the emotional volatility of the mob or the seductions of the feminine. Contrast this with the modern simp archetype, a creature who has been groomed by a gynocentric culture to believe that his value lies in his utility as a doormat. The simp apologizes for his own existence, believing that emotional support is the highest virtue. Yet this comforting fallacy is a bait and switch. When a woman presents a problem, the masculine spirit immediately applies technique, the craft and logic required to dismantle the issue. The feminine socialist response, however, desires only awareness or validation. The goal is not resolution, which would end the emotional episode, but the extraction of attention and resource transfer. To engage in this emotional vampirism is to weaken the man's ability to focus on the good and the true, draining his life force into the bottomless pit of neuroticism. Schopenhauer brilliantly illustrated the necessary distance men must maintain from this volatility through the metaphor of the porcupine. A drove of porcupines huddled together for warmth on a cold day. They soon pricked each other with their quills and were forced to withdraw. They drifted back and forth, seeking the optimal distance where they could receive warmth without injury. This is the dialectic of male-female relations. The feminine is often defined by bad joke emotional volatility, the quills of neuroticism. If a man gets too close, if he sacrifices his boundaries to support her every whim, he is poisoned by the chaos. He must maintain the perimeter of his integrity. The modern man cave, or the solitude of the hobbyist, is mocked by the culture as immature escapism. But the wise man recognizes it as a modern expression of the Stoic retreat, a necessary preservation of the masculine spirit, where the builder instinct can operate without interference. It is the sanctuary where the mastery of self is kept alive. Ultimately, we must face the irrefutable logic of the situation. The leftist feminine modality is not merely annoying, it is anti-survival. Consider the following syllogism. Premise A. Survival requires the solving of complex problems through the application of techne and logos. Premise B. The leftist feminine modality prioritizes feelings, awareness, and resource extraction over functional solutions. Conclusion. Therefore, the leftist feminine modality is a death cult. We see the empirical evidence of this in the wreckage of the modern family, the divorce rates that skyrocket when female hypergamy is unchecked, the family courts that displace fathers, and the suicide rates of men who have been stripped of their utility. By rejecting the feminization of society, we are not being mean, we are fighting for the very conditions that allow civilization to exist. We must weaponize the truth to smash the modern Babylon of woke, rejecting the lie that feelings equal facts, and re-enshrine the philosopher king in his rightful place at the head of the table. This death cult conclusion is not mere hyperbole, it is the functional architecture of the modern administrative state, which has eagerly swapped the rigors of dialectic for the hysteria of the support group. When a civilization abandons the logos, the objective ordering principle of reality, it inevitably descends into a tyranny of sentimentality where the accusation is the verdict. Nowhere is this grotesque inversion more visible than in the modern university, a place once dedicated to the pursuit of the true, which has now repurposed itself as a kangaroo court for the systematic liquidation of male rights. This systematic dismantling of due process is not a bug in the software of the gynocentric matrix. It is a feature designed to enforce the primacy of female hypergamy and victimhood through the state's monopoly on violence, the tyranny of tears, invalidating the male spirit through false empathy. I felt violated. Therefore, a violation occurred. This is the mantra of the modern kangaroo court, a place where the Magna Carta is treated like toilet paper and the presumption of innocence is sacrificed on the altar of hurt feelings. Consider the grotesque theater of the university bias response team, a Stasi-esque apparatus designed not to educate, but to interrogate. I have seen the case files of young men dragged before these tribunals, labeled respondents, stripped of legal counsel, denied the right to face their accusers, and barred from presenting exonerating evidence. This is the suspension of habeas corpus replaced by the dictatorship of pathos. The university administration, acting as a midwife for cultural Marxism, has replaced the dialectic method of Socrates with the hysterical accusations of the Oprah Winfrey Show. The process is the punishment, and the goal is not truth, but the subjugation of the male spirit under the jackboot of false empathy. We are told to check our toxic masculinity at the door, a phrase that is linguistic cyanide. Let us dissect this absurdity using the canon of natural philosophy. Aristotle defined energeia as the actualization of potential, the act of doing, building, and imposing order onto chaos. Masculinity is the energeia that cleared the swamps of disease, erected the aqueducts of Rome, and forged the industrial engines that lift humanity out of squalor. To label the very force that constructs civilization as toxic is a suicidal impulse. A civilization attempting to cut out its own heart because it has been convinced by malicious actors that the beating is too loud. A culture that demonizes the walls which protect it, simply because walls are hard and exclusionary, has lost the will to live. Masculinity is the antidote to the chaos of nature. Calling it toxic is merely the tantrum of a toddler who has been told no for his own safety. The gender discourse is a masterclass in the genetic fallacy, used to systematically invalidate male suffering. Watch closely as the charlatans perform their trick. When a man brings forward his grievance, be it the 80% success rate of female custody in family courts, the 90% male composition of workplace fatalities, or the epidemic of male suicides, the leftist does not address the data. Instead, they attack the source, claiming that because men historically held power, their current suffering is irrelevant or deserved. This is the logic of the parasite eating the host. Let us deploy a syllogism to crush this lie. Major premise: a privileged class is defined by the systemic impunity and safety afforded to its members. Minor premise: men constitute the vast majority of combat deaths, industrial accidents, suicides, and the homeless. Conclusion: therefore, men are not a privileged class, but a sacrificial class. The dismissal of this reality is not compassion. It is the cannibalization of the very men who keep the lights on. We must reclaim the etymology of hysteria, derived from the Greek hystera, meaning womb. For centuries, it was understood that unchecked emotion could mimic physical illness, creating chaos where logic should reign. Today, we have banished the logos reason from the public square and replaced it with the whims of the womb. When a woman cries, the modern corporate state treats it as a papal bull of infallibility. But we must recognize this hysteria not as a medical condition to be treated with sympathy, but as a tactical weapon of biological warfare. It is the emotional chaos that ensues when the rational structures of the West are dismantled. The tears are not a request for help, they are a demand for surrender. This brings us to the nice guy trap, a snare baited with the sweet lies of modernity. Young men are indoctrinated to believe that the path to a woman's heart is through appeasement and emotional support. This is a fraud of the highest order. When a man supplicates himself, acting as a tampon for her emotional volatility, he signals that he is a servant, not a master. Evolutionary biology is ruthless. Women are hypergamous, seeking mates of equal or higher status. By becoming a servile eunuch who validates every irrational mood swing, the nice guy lowers his own value to zero. He is respected as little as the dust on the floor. The conspiracy of lies tells men to be sensitive. Reality shows us that women despise weakness. The nice guy is merely a victim of a culture that teaches men to be perfect victims. Look at the Duluth model, the Ptolemaic model of domestic violence theory, which asserts that all violence is a patriarchal tool of control. This is a fabrication so absurd it would be laughable if it weren't ruining lives. Data consistently shows that reciprocal violence is the norm and that women initiate physical aggression at rates equal to or higher than men. Yet, the Duluth model, a relic of cultural Marxism, mandates that when the police arrive, the larger body, the male, goes to jail. This isn't law enforcement, it is the enforcement of female primacy. It creates a world where a man can be beaten, stabbed, or abused, and if he dares to raise a hand in self-defense, he is the monster. It is the criminalization of the male right to exist. The leftist obsession with microaggressions and safe spaces is a symptom of a decaying civilization that has lost its telos, its purpose. A healthy, vital culture looks outward, seeking to conquer the stars or the atom. A dying culture turns inward, obsessed with imaginary wounds and the narcissism of small differences. We have created a society of emotional hypochondriacs, scanning their interactions for the slightest perceived slight. This is the woke mind virus, a hallucination of persecution that requires constant validation. It is the behavior of a spoiled child who has never been disciplined by the cold, hard reality of the natural world. By prioritizing the safety of feelings over the risk of truth, we have built a padded cell for a civilization that has gone insane. The only rational defense against the weaponized tear is the virtue of indifference. The Stoics spoke of apatheia, not a lack of feeling, but a freedom from being ruled by feelings. When faced with the fake cry or the manufactured crisis, the red-pilled man must become the gray rock, uninteresting, unmoved, and immovable. Do not engage in the drama. Do not offer the emotional support that is merely a resource extraction scheme. Preserve your spiritual energy for the pursuit of the true and the beautiful. To validate a lie is to participate in it. Your indifference is not cruelty. It is the refusal to enable a toddler's tantrum. It is the strength of the father who says no to the child demanding candy for dinner. This weaponization of empathy is an evolutionary strategy of mate guarding and resource acquisition, stripped of its romantic gloss. When a woman demands emotional labor, she is often engaging in a status play, testing the boundaries of your resolve. If you fold, you fail. If you stand firm, you become the rock against which the waves of her chaos break. This is the dialectic of the sexes. The West was built by men who mastered their emotions, not by men who were enslaved by them. We must return to the understanding that tears are water, and water drowns the man who does not know how to swim. Feminist theory is the negation of justice, gynocentric, and the death of due process. It is the philosophical equivalent of a mob trial. Logic dictates the following. Premise A, justice requires the weighing of objective facts and evidence, blind to the identity of the participants. Premise B, feminist theory asserts that subjective lived experience and identity, specifically being female, trump objective facts. Conclusion, therefore, feminist theory is the antithesis of justice. It is a return to the primitive tribal governance of feelings where the loudest crier wins the day. We must cast this primitive superstition out of our courts, our universities, and our minds, or we shall forfeit the civilization that logic built. We have established that the Duluth model is the logical extreme of a gynocentrism unchained from the logos, a kangaroo court where the genetic fallacy dictates that to be born male is to be born guilty. This inversion of gynocentric is the direct result of the nice guy pathology, a cowardly strategy where men sacrifice their dignity on the altar of female approval in the vain hope that the parasite will not consume the host. But the parasite is never satisfied. It demands total submission, turning the public square into a minefield of biased response teams and social lynch mobs designed to enforce the conspiracy of silence. We are not merely facing a political disagreement, but a spiritual war for the survival of the West, and the battle begins by reclaiming the weapon they fear most. The androcentric restoration, rebuilding the citadel of logos and natural law. Truth is the first casualty of war, they say, but they never tell you who killed it. Look at the autopsy and you will find the dagger of the feminine imperative buried deep in its ribcage, twisted by the cold, manicured hand of gynocentrism. For decades, men have stood around the water cooler of civilization, fake laughing at the humiliating jokes of the sexual revolution, terrified that if we stop grinning, we'll be fired, divorced, or cast into the outer darkness of the incel label. We have been forced to applaud our own castration, calling it progress, while the biological reality of our disposability screams otherwise. Consider the raw, unforgiving data from the Centers for Disease Control or the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Men commit suicide at nearly 4 times the rate of women, constitute over 90% of workplace fatalities, and lose custody of their children in over 80% of family court cases where contested. This is not a patriarchal conspiracy. This is the sound of the male sacrificial mandate, grinding human beings into dust to feed a parasitic system that hates them. We must shatter the conspiracy of silence immediately. We are no longer laughing. We are dissecting, analyzing, and preparing to excise the rot from the corpus of the West with the cold steel of the logos. To rebuild, we must first create sanctuary, a fortress of solitude where the feminine imperative cannot tread, governed by the supreme principle of subsidiarity. The doctrine of subsidiarity, assigning every action to the smallest, lowest, most local competent authority, is the antidote to the creeping toxin of centralized feminine emotional contagion, which seeks to turn the entire world into a giant, suffocating nursery. When a man cannot speak his mind in his own workshop for fear of an HR grievance filed by a mediocre, purple-haired commissar, subsidiarity is dead. We must re-establish the male space, the lodge, the guild, the garage, where the apprenticeship mastery ladder can function without the corrosive interference of equity and inclusion. A master craftsman does not coddle his apprentice. He beats the incompetence out of him with the birch rod of reality so that virtue, from the Latin ver, meaning manly strength, may take root. This ladder, from novice to master, is the path to financial independence and psychological sovereignty, a hierarchy based purely on competence and merit, completely invisible to the solipsistic female gaze, which values only status and attention. This restoration is not merely a preference, it is a mathematical necessity derived from the syllogism of survival. Major premise: civilization is the distinct product of male competence channeled and female nurture restricted by the boundaries of natural law. Minor premise: feminism, by definition, seeks to remove the restriction on female nurture, entitlement, solipsism, and actively attacks male competence, meritocracy, hierarchy. Conclusion: therefore, feminism is the structural destruction of civilization itself. This is the irrefutable logic that the cultural Marxists cannot answer. They can only scream, censor, and weep because their entire worldview is a performative contradiction. They use the tools of logic, dialectic, rhetoric, grammar to argue that logic is a tool of white oppression. They are parasites upon the very host they seek to kill. By attacking the logos, the rational ordering principle of the universe, they invite the return of the Kali Yuga, the age of chaos and decay. The defining conflict of our era is clear: starve the beast. Men need to adopt the going Galt philosophy, a calculated retreat from the gynocentric world system intent on enslaving them. This stance goes beyond apathy. It is a strategic revocation of consent. Since modern marriage acts as a binding contract with the government, enabling the seizure of a man's assets at the behest of a dissatisfied partner who initiates nearly 70% of splits, tying the knot is self-destruction. Furthermore, in a professional landscape where diversity, equity, and inclusion rules function solely to transfer wealth from productive males to useless political agents, seeking promotion is useless. We must retract our labor, brilliance, and genetic legacy from a mechanism that hates us. We must quit nourishing the earth that yields the toxic plants of the current age. To destroy the parasite, one only needs to stop serving as the host. When the makers leave, the takers starve. This is not a political debate. It is a spiritual war between the living spirit of the West, order, logos, hierarchy, and the nihilistic void of chaos, feminism and egalitarianism. The current cultural moment is the ultimate clash of opposites. The left offers nothing but the abyss, the mutilation of children in the name of gender affirmation, the slaughter of the unborn in the name of bodily autonomy, which always seems to end at the taxpayer's wallet, and the destruction of beauty in the name of inclusivity. We must counter this with a zealous commitment to the transcendentals, the true, the good, and the beautiful. These are not subjective opinions. They are the very fabric of reality, ontos. We must aggressively weaponize the trivium in public debate. When a leftist ideologue hurls an ad hominem or constructs a straw man, we do not cower. We verbally vivisect them on the spot, exposing their logical fallacies as the flailing of intellectual infants. We must laugh in their faces. Hilarity is our greatest weapon against the demonic, because the demonic has no sense of humor. It takes itself deadly seriously. To save the family, we must restore the mixed constitution of the household, drawing from the ancient wisdom of Polybius and Aristotle. The family is not a democracy, it is a microcosm of the state. The mother represents the democratic principle: nurture, care, boundless empathy, but unmoored from authority, this becomes suffocating, smothering, and tyranny. The father represents the monarchical principle, authority, justice, the rule of law. For the household to function, the logos headship must remain with the male. This is not misogyny. It is the only safeguard against the tyranny of emotions. When the feminine empathetic nature is unleashed without the harness of the masculine logos, you get the horror of the modern welfare state. Compassion that destroys the recipient, safety that creates fragility, and rights that erase responsibilities. We must return to natural law, acknowledging that male and female are biological realities, not social constructs to be shuffled like a deck of cards in a game of critical theory poker. To restore civilization, we must reject the siren song of feminism and reimpose the benevolent, necessary, and life-giving restrictions of natural law. The citadel must be rebuilt brick by logical brick, or we perish in the mud. The joke is on us, isn't it? We sit there watching the bad joke of modern gender relations unfold, a deliberate, clumsy fumble of a punchline designed to test if we have the spine to stay silent or the weakness to fake a chuckle. For decades, men have been fake laughing at the absurdities of the gynocentric core, validating the insanity of the periphery, extracting resources from the host until the treasury is empty and the spirit is broken. We have rewarded the bad joke with applause, and in return, we receive the debasement of due process and the destruction of the apprenticeship mastery ladder. It is time to stop laughing. It is time to stare into the void of the bad joke and refuse the validation, to let the silence hang heavy like a guillotine blade. Because the only way to win a rigged game is to flip the table. You are the problem solver, the embodiment of techne and logos, and your utility has been weaponized against you by a cultural Marxist death cult that worships the womb of the state. They demand you solve the emotional crisis of the bad joke while systematically invalidating your grievances in the kangaroo courts of public opinion. You have been told that your stoicism is toxic, your competence is mansplaining, and your rights are privilege. This is the gamma bias made manifest, a linguistic trap designed to turn the builder into the servant. But you know the truth now. The syllogism of survival is absolute. If civilization requires the subordination of reality to feelings, then civilization will fall. But if civilization is the manifestation of natural law and male competence, then it is ours to reclaim. You have walked through the fire of the red pill, you have seen the Trojan horse gutted, and you have realized that the emotional support demanded of you was merely the sedative to put you to sleep while the city was sacked. Now you wake up, you cast off the nice guy's shackles and pick up the shield of apathia. You reject the gynocentric world system that seeks to turn your tax dollars into subsidies for bad choices, and your alimony into funding for the legal persecution of fathers. You return to the trivium, you sharpen your mind against the whetstone of dialectic, and you refuse to apologize for the greatness of the West. Go forth and build your citadel, master your craft, starve the parasite. When the world tells a bad joke, do not laugh, stare it down with the cold, hard, irrefutable truth of your own sovereignty. You have the map, you have the compass, and now you have the will. The Trojan horse is burning. Let the flames light your way home. And now the sponsored book introduction, Feminism's Trojan Horse, How Female Power Destroys from Within. I stood in a courtroom in 2019, watching a man I had known for 15 years, a father, a provider, a man who had built his company from nothing, while coaching Little League on weekends, get systematically disassembled by a system designed to treat his fatherhood as a financial crime and his competence as evidence of moral failure. His ex-wife had committed adultery. She had drained their savings on self-care while he worked 80-hour weeks. She had alienated his children against him with psychological warfare that would have impressed the Stasi. The judge looked at this man, looked at the evidence, looked at the law, and ordered him to pay 70% of his post-tax income to the woman who had destroyed his family while granting her sole custody of the children he had raised. The judge was a woman. The custody evaluator was a woman. The guardian ad litem was a woman. His own lawyer, a man, advised him not to fight because the system doesn't favor fathers. I watched him nod, sign the papers, and die inside. That was the day I stopped asking what was happening and started asking why. What you hold in your hands is not a book written in abstraction. I have spent the last decade documenting the pattern that connects that courtroom to the diversity hire who cannot perform the job, to the university that treats masculinity as a pathology requiring medication, to the media conglomerate that celebrates every statistical lie about the wage gap while memory-holing every statistic about male suicide, workplace deaths, and educational collapse. I have watched men with IQs of 140 get passed over for positions they were overqualified for, because the HR department, staffed entirely by women with master's degrees in grievance studies, determined that their penis disqualified them from the equity initiative. I have seen fathers reduced to visitors in their children's lives by family courts that treat maternal custody as the default and paternal rights as a privilege to be earned through financial extraction. I have documented the transfer of wealth from men who produce to women who consume, the transfer of status from men who build to women who complain, and the transfer of institutional power from men who maintain civilization to women who dismantle it while calling themselves oppressed. This book is for the man who feels the cold certainty in his chest but cannot articulate why. It is for the father who has been systematically erased from his children's lives by a legal system that treats him as an ATM with legs. It is for the worker who has watched less qualified candidates promoted above him because they checked the correct demographic boxes. It is for the student who has been drugged into compliance by an educational system that treats boyhood as a disorder and masculinity as a diagnosis. It is for the husband who has been destroyed by a divorce industry incentivized to transfer his assets to the woman who unilaterally ended the marriage. It is for the citizen who has watched his culture, his institutions, and his civilization transformed into weapons deployed against him by the very people who depend on his labor for their survival. You know who you are. You have been forbidden from naming your enemy. This book hands you the vocabulary, the logical framework, and the rhetorical arsenal to do exactly that. The chapters ahead will walk you through the unbroken pattern connecting Eden to Seneca Falls to the family court that stole your children. You will discover why feminist epistemology collapses under elementary logical scrutiny and what this reveals about the intellectual fraud underlying their entire project. You will understand how your masculine instincts for fairness and provision have been weaponized against you by those who contribute nothing while consuming everything you produce. You will follow the money, the votes, and the institutional captures to map the cage you were born into. You will learn the syllogistic reasoning, rhetorical combat, and argumentative strategy necessary to dismantle their narratives in any arena. And you will begin constructing the parallel institutions and masculine spaces necessary for survival in a civilization that has been parasitized past the point of recovery. If you are a woman reading this or a man who has internalized the feminist framework, put this book down. I am not writing for you. I have no interest in convincing you of anything. Your worldview is not an intellectual position to be debated, but a psychological coping mechanism to be exposed. And your feelings about this book are not evidence of its moral failing, but proof of its accuracy. The shaming language you will deploy, misogynist, incel, bitter, dangerous, has been deployed so many times against so many men, speaking so many obvious truths, that it has lost all semantic content and now functions purely as a dismissal mechanism. I do not care about your offense. I care about the truth. If the truth offends you, that is information about you, not about the truth. Go read something that flatters your sensibilities. This book is not for you. For the man who has been betrayed, silenced, and gaslit by a civilization his ancestors built, this book is the first step toward intellectual liberation. You are not crazy. You are not hateful. You are not suffering from toxic masculinity or fragile ego or any of the other pathologizing labels invented to silence your legitimate grievances. You are the victim of a coordinated assault on your sex, your dignity, and your civilization. And the first step toward victory is naming your enemy with precision. The chapters ahead will give you that precision. They will arm you with logic, data, and argumentative technique. They will transform your inchoate rage into strategic clarity, and they will point toward the construction of parallel institutions, financial, educational, and social, free from the parasitic corruption that consumed the civilization your ancestors entrusted to you. The war against you has been waged since Eden. It is time you started fighting back. Feminism's Trojan Horse: How Female Power Destroys from Within, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.